when speech is not free and when things become censored, we lose our ability to make sense of anything. Like censorship erodes our sense-making capability. And I think that's something that's really present right now is everybody's trying to censor and ban people from speaking. And that to me seems like a big problem.
Yeah, I mean, that I think has been one of the most extraordinary things that I've watched over the past, particularly the past 3 years, is the government's participation in censorship, which is clearly a violation of the First Amendment. And, you know, it also has been one of the driving tenets of liberalism. I mean, the word liberal means freedom, and it is intended to mean the freedom of speech and debate. The framers of the Constitution put it into, you know, Hamilton said, we put it into the First Amendment because it's the most important. Freedom of expression is the most important right, because a government that can censor its critics has license for any kind of atrocity. And during the pandemic, we saw that they tried out freedom of censoring speech at the beginning, and then they went after all of the other rights that are guaranteed by the First Amendment. They went after freedom of worship, which is also in the First Amendment. They closed every church in this country for a year with no scientific citation, no democratic process, no hearings, no notice and comment rulemaking, all the things that you need to do to pass a rule in government. They just ignored. They had one bureaucrat who's been there for 50 years and never been elected that said, okay, close all the churches, but we'll keep the liquor stores open. And it was, nothing made any sense that they were doing. And then they went after freedom of assembly, also in the First Amendment, which by telling us to social distance from each other and making it actionable if we got too close to each other, if we actually assembled. Then they went after freedom. They went after the Fifth Amendment guarantee of property rights that says the government can't take your property without due process and just compensation. They closed 3.3 million businesses without due process or just compensation. And they went after jury trials, which the Seventh Amendment says, no, very simple, no American shall be denied the right of a trial before a jury of his peers in cases or controversies exceeding $25 in value. And yet they made a rule that you can't sue a corporation that is involved in any countermeasure. So a pharmaceutical or a hospital association or a doctor who gives you a product that hasn't been tested or that is experimental and compels you to take it, which is illegal. And no matter how negligent their behavior, no matter how reckless they were, no matter how toxic the ingredient or shoddy the manufacturing process or insupportable the testing, and no matter how egregious your injury, you have no right now to sue them. And there is no pandemic exemption in the United States Constitution. And by the way, the framers of the Constitution knew all about epidemics. There were two epidemics during the Revolutionary War. There was an epidemic that decimated, a malaria epidemic that decimated the armies of Virginia. In fact, they used hydroxychloroquine, an early version of hydroxychloroquine during that epidemic, and then another epidemic of smallpox that completely disabled the army of New England for a period of time, during a period of time when we conquered Montreal. And Benedict Arnold conquered Montreal. We got into the inner city and took it over, but he had to withdraw because his troops had been so decimated by smallpox that they couldn't hold the city. They didn't have enough troops to hold it. Otherwise, Canada today would be part of the United States. And all of the people who wrote the Constitution understood that. They understood what the epidemics, and by the way, between the end of the Revolution and the adoption of the Bill of Rights, which is 9 years later, there were epidemics in every city in the country, smallpox, cholera, yellow fever, that killed tens of thousands of people, including most of the people who wrote the Constitution had lost family members or friends in these epidemics. So they knew all about epidemics, and they did not put an exemption to the Constitution into the Constitution. And during the Civil War, Abraham Lincoln tried to suspend one provision of the Bill of Rights, the right of habeas corpus, which means, holding somebody without a judicial hearing, because the Confederates were sending provocateurs to the northern cities to incite anti-draft riots, and it was causing terrible morale in there was terrible morale already in the North, and this was exacerbating it. And so he knew who the people were when they were coming north, and they tried to arrest them before they could give their speeches. And the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, Roger Taney, said, you can't do that. It doesn't matter. In the U.S. Civil War, 659,000 people died. It's the equivalent of 7.2 million today by population. So it was much worse than the COVID epidemic. And our nation was being torn to pieces and was in danger of actually being destroyed. And Roger Taney, the Supreme Court Justice, said, it doesn't matter. The Constitution is more important than the country. It's more important than 100,000 lives. The Constitution is, and he upheld it, and he made Lincoln release all the Confederates. Oh, we all know we all read Orwell when we were growing up. We read Kessler. We read Aldous Huxley. We read Robert Heinlein. All of these authors, Solzhenitsyn, who were telling us the worst thing you can do is censor speech. That is the first step. The next step is this slippery slope into totalitarianism. And somehow we forgot it. And particularly people who think of themselves as liberals, had this incredible cognitive dissonance where they forgot there's never been a time in human history when we look back and say, it was the good guys who were censoring speech. It's always the bad guys, right? There's no time that we think, oh yeah, those guys were doing the right thing. They were stopping people from talking. But all of that was just forgotten during the pandemic, and it shows the capacity of governments to use orchestrated fear to disable the capacity for critical thought, in all of us. And, ultimately, if you can't do critical thinking, you can't have democracy for very long.